live. Let's send this browser notification. Send that. And close.
Where are you, Kim?
I'm in Visalia. So we were going from kind of the coast, Big Sur, to Sequoia National Forest. And I was like, oh, there, Visalia is where it's going to happen.
That's great.
All right. So we are now officially streaming. Hey, guys.
Cool.
Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
Hi, I'm great.
Diane, we're here
See
for
you all.
episode number 2 of Integral Justice Warrior.
Yes, we certainly are.
And we've got some special guests with us today.
We do.
Your partners in crime for your new book, Compassionate Conversations.
Mhm.
We've got Kim Lowe. Hi, Kim.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
So glad you could join us today. And we've got Gabe Wilson. Gabe, how are you?
I'm great.
Is
Thank you
Gabe
for
fine,
having us.
or do you prefer Gabriel?
Definitely default to Gabe.
Gabe. Got it. Awesome.
Although you are like an angel.
Thank you. Sometimes.
Just so that people, I'm really familiar with the Integral audience and your crew, Corey, but people may not be so familiar with Gabe and with Kim. And so I'd like to take just a minute and tell you how the three of us came together. Is that okay?
Oh, please do. Okay.
So pretty much everybody on this podcast and most of the people I know in this world came together through some sort of interest in Ken's work. And Corey, you're probably in the top 3 to 1 people with an interest in Corey, an interest in Ken's work. I mean, he's been holding down kind of the landscape from Integral Naked until now. How many years has that been, Corey, that you've been doing
15, 16 years.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Wow.
It's kind of ridiculous.
It's kind of awesome because you've watched all these changes and morphs and developmental advances and stuck points, and you've seen the community grow and change in lots of ways.
And that's just talking about my own psychology.
Exactly. And Gabe was studied education at Stanford, for those of you who don't know him, and he was basically interested in developing his spiritual life, and he was very influenced by Ken, and then he started to visit different people who were doing spiritual teaching. Is that fair, Gabe? And then
Not really. I just visited one, which happened to be you.
that's not true. You went to Andrew Cohen's.
I went to Andrew Cohen's. Fair enough. And there was a big gap there. And I was like, I need a teacher. Saw a video of you. And I was like, this one is interesting. I've been around since.
And we worked together in the Integral Facilitator program with Becky Colwell. And also we developed a kind of an integral diversity training program called Freedom and Fairness that Gabe and I have worked on together. And then Kim and I also met through Integral, but were you introduced to me through that talk that someone sent to you? How did you meet me? How did I meet you?
A friend shared Buddhist Geeks podcasts with me.
Yes.
And I started digging into the back editions and I found you through it. And I remember distinctly when you did the transition from world-centric to cosmocentric, and something clicked in, and similar to Gabe, just like this one. Let's get deeper in here, please. Yeah, and then one thing to another, I got closer and closer until the book happened. So here we are.
Yeah, exactly. So here we are. And Kim studied at Columbia, and she has a master's in conflict resolution, and particularly in international peacemaking. So between my work, Kim's work in conflict resolution, Gabe's work in education, we have kind of a nice rounded crew. And the other thing that was important is in this next book, we were specifically going to be focused on conversations related to social justice issues, to diversity and inclusion. And it was super important to have people younger because the environment's changing for these things. And then also to have people with different perspectives, both from cultural and racial, ethnic point of view. So obviously we're all slightly different ethnic backgrounds. Interestingly enough, Kim is actually multicultural. I mean, her passport is a UK passport, so she grew up in England, but her ethnicity is Chinese, and she spent a lot of time in Asia, in Singapore particularly, and she knows Malaysia and China, has lived in China. And Gabe is an American and Brazilian citizen. His father's African-American, Black. His mother is white from Brazilian. And, you know, as everybody knows, I'm just a renegade from the American West. Who was never taught any manners. You know? So anyway, so it was a great pleasure to work on the book with them. It's the first time that I've collaborated on a piece of writing. And actually for me, I don't know what it was like for you guys, but for me, it was incredibly easeful, interesting, and in some ways challenging, you know, occasionally in terms of our perspective on something, occasionally in terms of maybe our style, our timing. So I liked that it was a group experience for me. It was really different. And we just basically sent the final draft off about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So we're pretty excited.
Yeah, and you guys sent me a working draft of the book, and I scanned through. I didn't have a chance to read the whole thing, but it looks absolutely incredible and so skillfully written. And I really love sort of how you weave these themes of social justice issues, but more importantly, sort of bringing online the sort of the communication skills and the conflict resolution skills and how to work with things like trauma and anger and, you know, how to communicate more skillfully and how to bring shadow work to bear. So, I mean, it really feels like a book that is right on schedule in terms of, you know, all this tension that we're feeling around us culturally, socially, politically, and all of that. So, I mean, really, really nice work, guys. And when does the book actually come out?
I believe it's May 2020.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well,
yeah, although the pre-order link is available.
Ooh.
And we can put it in the Zoom link.
Yeah.
So that people can go ahead and pre-order if you'd like to on Amazon.
Yeah, and when we publish this on Integral Life, I'll put the link right underneath the video. So
okay.
Everyone watching can keep an eye out for that. And, you know, Dan, last month when you and I were talking in our first episode, one of the things that we're talking about is how, in a certain way, this book is, you know, kind of like a Trojan horse, right? I mean, it's sort of, it's aimed at people who are at, let's just say, pre-integral stages, and allows them to, you know, really learn some important features, I think, of integral thinking and just sort of the overall integral sensibility. But as I was looking through the book, you know, one thing that really occurred to me is it seems like the inverse is also kind of true, that, you know, this book is also, I think, it's going to really help integral people to sort of better integrate their own green in a certain kind of way.
I think so.
Their own green views, values, shadows, etc.
Well, that was a conversation that the three of us had a lot, because we've all been quite immersed in developmental theory, and particularly in terms of working at Integral Institute and with Ken. And so we often had conversations about amber values of civility and minding your manners, and orange values about efficiency and just getting things done and not getting bogged down in this. And then really, really important green values that come online in terms of being genuinely fair, including marginalized voices, being sensitive to your own interior, talking about emotional states, you know, those kinds of things. And Kim particularly has been, I mean, I was an activist when I was younger, but I haven't been for quite a long time in a direct way, but Kim has spent a lot of time being an activist. And so the three of us had lots of back and forths around where exactly do we land this discussion? And yeah, we might have some things to share about our decision making. Does that interest you a little bit, Corey?
Yeah, no, totally. Please go on.
Yeah. What do you guys think about that challenge we had? And Kim, your light looks great right now, just to say.
Oh, good. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, I would go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, I hope my connection will hold out. I just saw it give a little delay. So let me know if it's not working. Yeah, I found that such an interesting tension point to kind of dance in throughout the process of writing the book. And I would actually say for myself that I probably identify more as a pre-integralist. And I sort of, things are definitely sifting through by osmosis, certainly the longer that I hang out with Diane in this community of practitioners, which is really wonderful to me. And because my background is as a lawyer, I've certainly tussled over the years with my notions of justice and how that's supporting our evolution, or where it's, you know, actually part of a resistance that needs to be looked at very carefully. So yeah, I really appreciated all the dialogue that we had and the alertness that we had to our process of how do we make some of those decisions about, say, the emphasis of a chapter, or where we conclude, or how this connects with what's to come next. So yeah, I was very challenged and enthused about the process.
Mm-hmm.
Gabe, did you want to speak to your experience?
Yeah. And the way that you put it, Corey, actually put a new frame on. So this is hot off the press. So hopefully it comes out clearly. But I remember my own time learning integral. And, you know, once I got into it for like a year or two, I thought I was the hottest shit around. I was like, I get it. I've evolved. I've like downloaded this software and it's like Gabe 2.0, you know? And so it's a kind of psychoactive, and we joke about that, right? So there is a positivity of actually reading developmental theory and saying, oh my goodness, I can evolve, and there's a map, you know? It's not just me, there's a pattern, you know, that many human beings go through, and that's exciting and enlivening. And there's something inherently in us, you can call it the evolutionary impulse, that's like, yes, follow that. I followed it conceptually for a very long time, though. And I think I kind of entered my own self-delusion around thinking that I've developed, but it was only really through my intellect. And then I met Di. And
and she kicked your ass, I'm guessing.
She kicked my ass in the best sense possible. In that, there was just all these other lines of development and also perspectives, frankly, that I had not cultivated or sought in terms of perspectives, right? And I feel like this book does that. And so in terms of the integral community, going into the intellect, getting this massive framework, and then realizing like we need to go back and train and figure out the interpersonal maneuvers, the emotional dexterity in ourselves, and also how to do that for others, to actually navigate the multiple perspectives, right? So in a way, the book offers both. You know, offers the developmental kind of blue pill or whatever, the red pill that Morpheus gave Neo to expand people's minds, and then also just the skills that you don't get reading the theory, or at least that I didn't, but that you do if you practice, can actually help you navigate terrain and experientially know different perspectives and know the nuances and uniqueness of each perspective. So yeah.
No, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that really jumped out to me as I was, you know, scanning through the book was, you know, you guys, again, you take on all of these really sort of controversial issues, these issues that have become just these hot spots in culture, almost like these fault lines between these tectonic plates of views and values and all that. And you do such a great job of going through each of these and really sort of honing in on what's true, but what's partial for each of these topics. And, you know, I think that this is important for the integral audience, because I think there's many people within the integral audience who.
Sorry, everybody.
Oh.
Let me mute for a sec here.
We have another guest.
Do we ever? They're supposed to be quiet.
So we call them the hounds.
Keep going, the hounds. It's gotten ridiculous. Go ahead, Corey.
But yeah, I think that there's a lot of people in the integral community who tend to reject a lot of these conversations on their face because they see them as sort of the products of a purely green view. And I think that gets really problematic because people really, I think, miss out on a lot of just discussions that are becoming increasingly important and increasingly important for us to be able to navigate skillfully. And, you know, I think that, to be fair, a lot of these topics really have been sort of hijacked by an unhealthy and aggressive and often regressive subset of the left. But again, you guys do such a great job of kind of separating the wheat from the chaff in a certain kind of way and really getting to the important critiques that lie at the core of these arguments. And I'm wondering what that process was like for you guys as you were writing together. I mean, did you have a sense as you were getting into each of these topics that like, wow, this one's a bit touchy. I feel like I'm kind of going out on a limb here by focusing so much on something so controversial, or was it sort of kind of more seamless for you guys?
I think one of the pep talks that we gave each other at the beginning was realizing that when you're writing a book like this, that people will be looking to for guidance. And that basically, if you're lucky, the people who purchase it or read it are going to be actually seeing the world through different perspectives, different lenses of development, you might say. So what we kind of coached each other was to expect everyone to be unhappy, depending. So, for the people who are working in business, they'll find it way too touchy-feely. For the people who are engaged in more social justice perspectives, they won't find it filled with self-righteous, or not self-righteous, but righteous, let me use the word righteous, like righteous advocacy. It won't have enough of that. And for the people who might have more of an integral level of development, they might find it a little bit too much trying to educate people in mainstream positions, particularly white people, about perspectives that they may not be used to taking. One of the reasons that the left gets as heavy-handed as it does is it takes a lot to get people to listen, as we know. It always requires some level of disruption and getting angry before people want to step outside their comfort zones. I want to share one quick thing and then open it up to the rest of you for a minute. But I watched the other night, a friend of mine and I'm 60 and he's about 70. And we watched the movie MASH from the old days, not the television series, but the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was made in 1972 or something like that. And I was astounded at how annoyingly sexist it was. And what I mean by that is the way the women figured in the, in the scenarios. They were no main players and they were basically there to be hit on and objects of, male, whatever. And, I'm not against that entirely, but it was just kind of astounding to me how much of it there was, how much implicit racism there was, how much cruelty there was in terms of just the treatment of people in it and how funny it was supposed to be. And I could get into that part of it, but another part of me just came away thinking, my God, we've actually changed.
Yeah.
Over
totally.
however many years that's been now, 40 years. And I would say we've changed for the better, God damn it.
Yeah. It's funny, Diane. I'm a massive Star Trek dork.
Yeah.
And Star Trek is one of the most progressive sort of 50-year franchises that we have in our culture. And when you go back to watch the original series, and this again, really progressive, in a show that for its time was insanely progressive.
Yeah, precisely.
You watch it now, and it's like every time a woman comes on the screen, they smear Vaseline on the lens, and so you get that kind of glowy sort of. Yeah. And you can feel how sort of anachronistic it is.
Yeah, that was my experience. I was like, well, damn it,
right?
This is important. So how do we assert how important it is, and also give room for other points of view, which is our challenge. So that's part of what we talked about. We talked about displeasing everybody, and then we felt like we'd be okay.
That's when you know you're doing something right?
Yeah. How about you guys? How do you remember that we navigated this? Because it was our greatest challenge, without a doubt.
I mean, to jump in, and this will be brief. In one of these workshops that we facilitated, Corey, Freedom and Fairness workshops where we explore intergroup dynamics. We had a room of white people and a room of people of color. It was about a 50-50 split. And I'm biracial. And since I've been in this country, it's been about, at least on this part, the last 15 years I've been here in this country. I was in Brazil prior to that. And, in some way or another, I felt myself to not be Black enough. First, I realized, oh shit, I'm Black. And then when I tried to explore that identity, going back into my own lineage, but also exploring it here in the present with my peers of color, especially those that identify as Black, I found that I still didn't quite fit in because of this other half, this white half, this Brazilian half. And so there is this pressure of like trying to be Black enough. And so I remember in this workshop, I kept losing my neutrality as a facilitator, because I noticed that when I bonded and made, when I opened myself up to the participants that were white, I would kind of get implicitly, explicitly, indirectly, directly communications from the people of color of like, you're not being tough enough on the white people, you're being too easy on them. And I remember receiving like Malcolm X videos of like Malcolm X just like laying down the truth on something. You know, it's like, this is how you got to be. I'm like, okay. And then I would try. I was compelled by that. I really wanted to serve them as well. But in trying to do that and become more what they wanted me to, I lost connection with the white people in the room. So I was kind of in this back and forth relationally. And I was sucking at facilitating at that point, because I just can't. I'm being formed by the relationships in the room. But I had this breakthrough where I realized, you know what?
Tell him about before you had the breakthrough, when you had the breakdown.
Oh God, there was
Those are always the best part of the story.
Which breakdown? I mean,
just the first break when we came into the break room.
Oh God. So the dance one? So
I think that was a different one, but that was a good
there are
one.
many breakdowns, Corey. But basically, every breakdown involved me splayed out on the staff room table between breaks and just not knowing what to do. And you know, what became present to me is that in my own experience, I actually feel very at home in myself. I feel very at home with my differences. And I think that's a product of how I grew up in my own karma. But I felt very divided in myself at that time in that workshop, because I was trying to kind of appease these two groups. And I didn't know how to do it. And what I realized was like, you know what? I actually want to be in a conversation where people are for each other, principally. And if that's not a position that you're willing to take, then I totally respect you and I love you, and I'm not going to work with you. And that allowed me to be intimate with everyone in the space that could join with that value. And so in terms of like, everyone's going to be disappointed, that was a helpful injunction. And we presence this in one of the chapters, like you have to be for each other fundamentally. So you have to maintain a relationship even though we disagree. So hopefully that comes through the book when people read. Hopefully they disagree with us plenty, and they stick with the seeking of perspectives and the seeking of understanding and the seeking of maintaining that connection.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And you were talking about sort of how you were trying to navigate this split that you felt in yourself. And, one of the things that really comes through in this book is that, right from the very beginning, you guys identify sort of a central polarity that I think ends up really becoming sort of the core thesis of your entire book, which is, the polarity between sameness and difference. And I think the general idea is that all human beings sort of possess this shared commonality, the same emotional states, the same basic drives and needs and desires, etc. But these commonalities are obviously usually expressed in very different and very unique ways from person to person. So I'm wondering if the three of you could each kind of say a little bit more about this polarity, how you manage it, how you unpack it throughout the course of the rest of the book. Oh, Diane, you're muted.
Yeah, Kim, do you want to lead? You might have something from the last question you want to add, and if not.
Yeah, sure. I think what was really curious in my own process when we were co-writing this book is noticing how I identify sometimes, with those different points on that polarity of sameness and difference, and how do I experience that. And growing up, as a kind of a third culture kid bouncing around, I was always paying attention to what was happening in the customs and the culture of whatever place that I was inhabiting, and some of that difference being very anxiety provoking. And I notice how I can carry that into my body, in modern sort of now time, when I'm engaging, say, on the other side of the world with people who might feel different to me. And so there was a way in which, studying Zen with Diane has really deepened my way of relating to sameness, and writing this book and bringing together some of those lenses and ways in which I want to choose to be in the world and show up for one another. How can I say it? Just definitely there was inner churning happening. It was a personal process. And the thing that I just want to connect in with, and I think it underlines what Gabe was just sharing there. It's like sometimes in maybe being careful of some of those rough edges that happen along those lines of our difference, there can be an avoidance, a withdrawing, you know, kind of a pulling back. And instead asking the question, well, what is it that I do really represent, want to be for in this circumstance? And that is, for me, the question kind of kept pointing around towards coexistence, towards finding that unity in the diversity, to bringing it together and being for the greater whole. And in my mediation training, there's that ideal of being a neutral, but what I think conveys it better to me is instead to be for everybody. So instead of seeking to not offend individuals in the room, to be for their own experience coming forth with as much fullness as possible, and, you know, being a soil that can be with all of that. So yeah, there's a few thoughts that kind of jumbled together for me, but it's been powerful.
But Kim and I did disagree for a moment over an updated label, because I was behind the times and calling the Middle East, and she helped me see that there's another way to look at the Middle East. Do you remember?
Yeah, and yeah, I was adding the point of view that West Asia now for some is like a preferable title. And for me, actually, that got me to think more deeply about, well, the readership and the fact that we're in the States, which for me is still a learning experience. Mm-hmm. So it navigates different levels of difference. And then Diane, obviously being my teacher at the same time, I also have questions of, well, how much do I assert into this difference or stand up for something which is very contextual, actually. Mm-hmm. There's no ultimate truth in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was definitely the challenge. I know that the sameness and difference, basically, the point that I try to, you know, what I'm hearing Kim say is that in her experience that it heightened to some degree. Help me, Kim. What I think I heard you say is that writing about it heightened your sensitivity to your own sameness and difference. It helped you recall a lot of growing up in other parts of the world where you were very comfortable and there was a lot of commonality. And when you actually felt your nervous system excited by the differences, and being able to see culturally those differences from an insider perspective and an outsider perspective, both. And then in terms of our actual writing, when we would find differences arise between the three of us, when do you assert and when do you yield? Based on what? And there's always, in our case, there's the issue of role, where I implicitly have more power because of my teaching status. And so did you have the freedom to push back or not? And why? And in what moment? Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, I think one of the things that I'm emphasizing with sameness and difference is just how fundamentally different the embodied experience is. And that's something that we give quite a lot of room to, because commonality is an experience of relaxation. When we are the same as we relax, which is why people hang out with people who dress like they do and use the same language. And you can't get away from a boundary around culture. We have this idea about diversity, but the fact is that we all, even if we're from different racial backgrounds or we're mixed based on gender, the fact is there's so much commonality that always brings us together, because human beings entrain and attune and feel safe in relationship to those who are the same. And then in meditation, we discover, of course, the ground of being, emptiness from a Buddhist perspective, and the state of being deeply relaxed and deeply alert at the same moment is such a pleasurable state to be in. It's tremendously relaxing, and issues of safety. I mean, all these dualities disappear, safety and danger disappears, relaxation and alertness disappears, because the mind is simply still. And experiencing that level of oneness really is something. So to be to say we're for each other and our humanness, but to actually experience ourselves as the same as all things, that's a level that we really want to point to.
Right.
And then our nervous system is tremendously excited when it picks up difference. It's exciting. It's where creativity resides. Erotic tension always comes through the encounter with difference, and difference very quickly turns from excitement to threat. And threat in the nervous system is a deal breaker. It's
Right.
very, very difficult to work when human beings feel threatened or when animals feel threatened. I used to train horses. It was exactly the same thing. If a horse was excited or if it felt threatened, the first thing you had to do was calm, reestablish rapport, and then begin to train again. You can't do it when people are excited and defensive. So that's something that anybody that's doing conversations on any topic, to the extent that people feel threatened, they're not going to execute nearly as well. So how do you recalibrate the room, help people come into sameness, and then pick up the differences in a way that don't overexcite the system or bring out too much defensiveness? So that was a big exploration for me.
Right. Yeah, it seems like there's, oh, go ahead, Gabe.
I was just going to add, in terms of the other aspect of a lot of the interpersonal work that we do, one thing that I've learned from Dai is actually difference is what grows us. It's like the challenge, right? So whenever conflict arises, and this is a Robert Keegan quote for the developmentalists out there, but he says, whenever conflict arises, whenever difference arises, and there's a tension, and there's a actually desire to negate the other and assert your perspective, we should pause, because it's probably meaning that our own partial point of view is being related to as like the whole truth, right? And it's actually an indication that we're missing something. So just the fact that difference grows us, and if we engage it in the ways that we invite people to explore, it's good news that you're in conflict, because it might be an opportunity to grow. And you need to cultivate a lot of sameness, a lot of safety, a lot of support. And so we sometimes say in our work, and this is in one of the chapters that we talk about, like the ground rules to set and contain your conversations and orient to. One of the ground rules is like support and challenge. So I can only challenge you to the degree that you feel supported by me. And we're always testing those boundaries on both sides. So just to say that was also an inquiry. Still is an inquiry for me. Yeah.
Right. I love how you framed it as, the differences is really where we grow, because it seems to me that, in a certain kind of way, well, first off, it seems like that, just in terms of our overall kind of cultural zeitgeist right now, we are very hyper-focused on, whoops, broke a picture frame. We're very hyper-focused right now on finding differences. And that might just be due to the sheer overwhelm of being in this interconnected online world where, sort of we have this re-tribalization happening all around us, as opposed to like when I was growing up, when, in the 1980s, everything was "We Are the World" and "Hands Across America." And it was, sort of growing up in just a decade after we got the first images of the Earth from space, and sort of the deep commonality that made us feel. There was something about this transition into sort of the online world where I think that started to kind of shift a little bit. And now we really are sort of hyper focused on sussing out our differences, which I think feeds into sort of some of the unhealthy versions of intersectionalism, for example, where that's really all we're trying to do is figure out what makes you different from me. How am I and how am I not allowed to take your perspective at any given time, et cetera. And I think it's important what you said, Gabe, about we grow through the differences, because, for me, in my own experience, it seems like, our strengths is where we find our differences. We are unique in our strengths. We're unique in what we do well. But in our vulnerability, that's where we find our commonality. Suffering brings us to sort of this universal shared commonality between us. The broken heart sort of takes everyone to the same place in a certain kind of way. So it seems like, in a certain sense, being willing to try to find this commonality actually requires a certain type of vulnerability that is maybe cutting against the grain a little bit, in terms of where we are culturally today. Do you think that's valid? Can you validate me, please?
Do you feel vulnerable?
I always feel
that
vulnerable.
You're not being validated immediately? I would
Why
say
did-
a little yes and a little no. I
Okay.
think yes. I like the observation, the observation that our differences make us distinct and our strengths can be found in those differences. And that vulnerability, when we're vulnerable, it's a very similar experience. It's felt similarly in me as it's felt in you. It's experienced similarly, and it creates this sort of openness that is tender. And that there's that's a very common thing. But I would also notice that, for instance, this conversation that we're having and the way we're having it is very particular to people who, have a penchant for integral theory and like to think and like to look at the world this way. I couldn't have this conversation with my dad.
Mm.
His mind would drift and he'd say, "Are we making dinner?" I mean, he just would have no idea. So I do notice that a strength of ours is shared. This
Sure.
strength, a particular strength we have of liking to think and use language and talk. And so I like your observation. And I would just add that I think sometimes our strengths are also our commonalities.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And, if you're a pro athlete, obviously so's everybody else
Right.
in that way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then to compliment, and then Kim, I'd love to hear from you. I'm sorry. I sometimes talk too much. That was one of the dynamics, Corey, maybe in our group. There was a difference. I was like, I found myself talking too much. Sometimes. I don't know if that's true. That was my perception.
You
There's a
did?
difference.
You found yourself talking too much with the
Sometimes.
three of us?
Sometimes. Not to
What do we
bring-
think? Let's vote, Kim. Did we think he talked too much?
Too much is a gray zone. Where's too much? Sometimes you have to not
Very
do it.
diplomatic. I like it.
Yeah, it was diplomatic. Anyways, I diverged. We can get into our dynamics and would serve others.
Well, Gabe, I'll tell you, when you're a guest on a webinar, talking too much is a gift.
Okay.
Just so you know.
It's a strength.
Thanks for the permission.
I always talk too much, so you and I have that in common. No gray zone here.
No. What I would say, just to bring nuance, I totally see what you're pointing to, Corey.
Mm-hmm.
And Diane pointed to strengths being a similarity. You pointed to can be. You pointed to, Corey, vulnerability, and that's a shared place. That's a place where we can join in sameness almost. And then by the same flip side, I think it's also true that our vulnerabilities, when looked at through the lens of groups, from an ethnocentric lens, can have their particularities as well. And in that way be not divisive, but can create separation or distinction between people. So yeah, it's interesting. I guess now I realize it cuts both ways based on what you're saying and what Ty said. Yeah.
I think we should talk about a built-in difference right now, which is you three are basically young and I'm a has-been.
You already got one foot in the grave here, Diane.
Yeah.
So, how do we navigate that difference? What do you guys, what do? You tolerate me?
Well, it's funny, right? Because like when a difference arises, right? There's a polarity, it's like young and old. And old seems to have a negative valence in this moment, and young seems to have a positive valence. So I'm noticing that. And in my experience, the fact that you're older, and I would reframe that in the positive, like an elder. I joke with Diane and say, like, if I hadn't met her, I would be like a millennial desperado out there, And so there's, anyways, picking up the other side. But that's in terms of working with it, just noticing the ups and downsides of each side.
Yeah.
Well, it's we're sort of making light of it, and that was funny. But this is, I think, a real problem that, or a real concern, I should say, that is facing the integral community right now. Which for the first sort of couple decades of integral, it was really produced sort of for boomers by boomers. You know what I mean? And now we're actually.
But you say that in the context of boomeritis.
No, I don't.
It's the equivalent of a racial slur to call me a boomer.
I mean, you can call me a Gen X wastoid, and I promise I will not take any offense whatsoever. Yes, we are all slackers, every one of us. No, but I mean, there is
Yeah,
this
no, I'm teasing.
generational gap, I think. And, particularly as we're seeing, I was really hit heavily last year when Father Thomas Keating passed away.
Mhm.
And, and we've seen a number of our elders, passing on. And I'm always wondering, okay, who is sort of emerging in this space that is going to, pick up the torch and carry this forward. And it's tricky because I do think there are sort of these generational gaps where, we're drawing on different sort of sets of signifiers. We have different sort of
we're different
processes. And so I think that in a certain kind of way, Diane, what I really appreciate about you and just your presence and how you dispense your wisdom is that it feels like we're creating this connective tissue. It actually feels like you're creating a space for this new leadership to emerge. And gosh, I really appreciate that. And it gives me confidence that this thing is going to continue to unfold over, the next several decades and so forth. But it is, I think, a real tricky issue. I think people are trying to figure out how do we sort of reinterpret a lot of these ideas and find different new metaphors and new idioms in order to help them land in new ways. And that's why, particularly today, I'm so psyched to have Gabe and Kim joining us today, because I think you guys are doing this in a new voice, and you're doing it really, really beautifully. So just, thank you. It's really wonderful to see.
Kim, did you want to weigh in on that last pass?
Yeah, I feel like my internet, I'm like on a slight mental delay too. The thing that was important to me about what we were saying just there, and I think this could be interesting for sort of potential readers of our book, is how that one up, one down dynamic can play out along any of our lines of difference, given, other variables at play too, and that not being of any fixed trait in and of itself.
Right.
There will be instances where coming from Gen X, Gen Y, and the upbringing, the opportunities, the resources, everything that being stacked in their favor, but then also this undeniable, upside of having a lot of hindsight and just the ways in which someone who is older could observe patterns in a different way with a greater depth, and those two traits, those strengths playing in a way which can be complementary. And what I think could be interesting for people now, readers coming to this book, is we can take that into areas which can be a little bit more edgy. So what is the upside of being a victim, for example, of persecution and genocide? Like, is there one? Can people locate that?
Careful.
It's challenging. Am I being...
Well, the upside of being a victim is, you're saying it's edgy, right?
Yeah,
it's
edgy. And what's the downside? Where's the restriction if you've been on that majority power holding position for such a long time? And can we invite greater flexibility in our willingness to entertain some of those things? Because, well, my sense is that when we can't, we are limiting the fullness of what we can experience as humans in relationship to each other in a complicated, complex world, perhaps. So yeah, that's what I would see as an area that could be interesting for people coming to this book of, well, how can we create more layers to this conversation that can inform how we show up to one another rather than staying in our roles. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I'm just grateful that it feels like we're being given permission in a certain kind of way to begin actually having the edgy conversations. I would say this is the sort of probably the greatest gift that Donald Trump has given us, is sort of peeling off this scab of unhealthy political correctness. Now, that's not to say that political correctness is itself unhealthy, but I think that, we could probably look at the last several decades of how political correctness has been enforced. And, we might observe that this has actually limited sort of the depth of the conversations that we've been allowed to have over the last couple of decades. And now that this sort of scab is being really kind of painfully just ripped off, there's a rawness to it, right? But it's actually allowing us to begin having these conversations, I think, in a more authentic way. Now, you also have people having these conversations in a much more sort of trollish way. But I do think that this is sort of the gift of the age that we live in today. We can be a little bit more honest. We can, start saying things that we weren't really allowed to say 10 years ago. And that's not just, I'm not saying like we're allowed to be racists and sexists and homophobes and shit like that, but we're allowed to begin having conversations that sort of would have been marginalized 10 or 15 years ago. And I think that's a gift, and I'm psyched that you guys wrote this book again at just the right time, where you're landing yourselves right in the heart of these edgy conversations. And you guys actually do a whole chapter on political correctness, yeah? Maybe Diane, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what you see as healthy political correctness, which I think is just kind of basic human decency and empathy in a certain kind of way, versus unhealthy forms.
Well, I mean, the Buddhist tradition, we would talk about it as right speech, basically speaking to and about each other with respect and with compassion and with goodwill, and noticing when we're venting and acknowledging, taking responsibility for ourselves when we're in that kind of negative mind space, and then seeing what we can do to transform it. And occasionally just making fun of ourselves and making fun of others is actually a good thing. I mean, nothing can get so sacred that we can't make fun of ourselves. And I think that one of the arguments we make in the book is that political correctness has been a really, really healthy developmental step. Basically, everybody who's in public office, everybody who has access to media, everybody who has any celebrity at all has to be, to some degree, more conscious of how they're talking about people not like them. And that's a good thing. I mean, this Dave Chappelle special's out right now, and he's getting super mixed reviews for his willingness to be irreverent. And I basically feel like I have that kind of streak of irreverence of, just making fun of things that we shouldn't make fun of. The only thing the only thing would round it out for me is if Dave Chappelle also made fun of black men. Right. Then I'd feel like we'd have something.
Right.
I mean, if he'd hit that home run, then I'd just be with him 100%.
Which he does, and he has, just not in that special, right?
Not in that particular special, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, but basically then what happens is it becomes rule bound. Actually, the worst thing about political correctness is it just becomes a ploy to beat other people up and to put yourself one up, as Kim was talking about. So at its worst, political correctness is actually, its own. We used a phrase for it. There's some comedian that calls it something, but it's basically manners in disguise. It's just being used in the exact same way. And that's at its worst from my point of view.
Gabe, did you have what to say about that?
Just ditto. I think for me, what's helpful, so typically, and this comes up for me naturally, and I think most people can sense into it, is whenever I come to an argument or come to a conversation where I feel like my point of view is better, I want to assert it and I want to convince the other person of it. And political correctness, at least for me, carries a very similar thing. Like, you either have to see the world in this way, or just get out of my way, or don't relate to me, or whatever. It has some certain carrying assumptions, and preserving everything that both of you presents. Like, there's actually an integrity to political correctness. It's like watching right speech, how it shapes our relationships and how it shapes our perceptions of other people. But for me, I find that I can relax around it, and I can get my groups that I work with to relax around it when I invoke a certain intention. So the one that I typically work with is, let's have a conversation. It's not even about proving one side wrong or the other, but it is about deepening our connection to one another and growing our worldview. And so to the degree that we can relax political correctness in service of that, I think we would be a benefit. And typically people can cozy up to that, and they'll feel the boundaries around, like, God, I haven't really shared this perspective with anyone. But, fill in the blank. And so shifting the intention explicitly to like growth and connection, which is like the qualities of our relationship in this moment, has been helpful for me in terms of relaxing the policing of words.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think
makes
that's that in a certain way that it seems like that's kind of what it comes down to. It's there's a difference between self-policing, policing how, you know, how we show up and how we engage with each other and how we communicate, versus policing everyone else. And I think that that's when this conversation can really slide. And for the people who aren't sort of themselves selecting into this this natural empathy that comes with political correctness, they see it as obnoxious. They see it as, well, you're trying to set the parameters of what I am and am not allowed to talk about, and that creates a certain kind of resentment, which I think, again, sort of contributes to, as healthy as it is, and Diane, I completely agree with you that in a lot of ways, political correctness was a tremendously healthy step up. And I think that it also allowed for a certain sort of unspoken Cold War to develop around a lot of these issues, because neither side felt safe enough to actually engage skillfully with the other. And so now it feels like that is sort of hitting its boiling point, and we're beginning to see some of these really, really essential conversations bubbling out. Now, I think the best of these conversations are the ones that still have some modicum of human decency and empathy and skillful communication to them. So it's not a matter of just taking the lid off of political correctness and leaving it off and what have you. But I do seem to perceive this sort of like there's this relieving of pressure in a certain kind of way. There's this relieving of this expectation that you know, my language is always going to be clean to the point of sterility, to the point of like almost meaninglessness. I can't say anything meaningful because, geez, my words can be interpreted in so many different ways.
Well, if I'm a person of color, and you guys, I'm not, but if I take on the perspective of a person of color, let's say, or in my case, a woman, let's just say that, you know, the fact that, you know, let's just leave it to being a woman, since I can speak from there, just use the male, female, and obviously gender, but just in this case, the male female dynamic, you know, that we made you uncomfortable long enough to start paying attention to how you treat and talk about us is fine with me. And I'm also happy that now you're starting to feel more free, that you can push back, or you can say, you know, like, I'm not, you know, don't try to train me to be your girlfriend, you know, because I'm not, I'm a man and I'm different, and I'm, you know, and I want to be respected on those terms. And I also want space to tell you what it is I don't like about you. I'm all there, but I don't have 1 ounce of regret that you've been made to be uncomfortable.
Right.
Not one.
Right.
Does that make sense to you guys? Because that's how things change.
Yeah.
Nothing changes if there isn't some, you know, grinding of bone on bone, you know, that's just the way it works. And you know, I mean, these guys know from the work that I do that I don't tolerate people putting men down in my workshop. In our workshops, I don't tolerate white people being made to hold all the responsibility for everything all the time, as though human beings haven't just been abominable to each other across all categories, you know.
Yep.
The point that Kim was making a few minutes ago, that the one up, one down dynamics exist inside of language. They exist inside of nationality. They exist inside of gender. They exist inside of color. I mean, it's everywhere. It isn't simply about these very crude categories of white and male and whatever. It's like we all do it to each other all the time. But if you've been in a class of people that for however many hundred of years you've been experiencing one down to the point that you're fed up, as a white person, as a male, as a person of privilege, it's really important to just acknowledge that and say, hallelujah, I'm with you, I understand. I mean, it's really important that those of us in that position, whatever it happens to be, are willing to concede that there's something worth being heard. Would you agree, Corey?
Absolutely. I think it's beautifully said. God damn, you guys are good communicators. Y'all are good at what you do. Well, we've got another half an hour left together, and we can continue talking to each other. This is so much fun, and I'm sure we can find 100 other things to talk about, or we can open it up to our audience and have them ask some questions. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Totally, we should.
That sounds fun for sure.
Out of, you know, just practicing manners. As
Yeah,
we've been talking about.
some basic fucking etiquette here, guys. Come on. So everyone who's watching us, so here's the instructions. So if you're watching us right now on integrallife.com/live, right underneath this video, you're going to see a link to take you into the Zoom app. That's going to bring you into the platform that we're using to have this webinar right now. Once you're in the Zoom app, there's two ways that you can engage with us. You can either press the raise my hand button, which lets us know that you want us to turn on your camera, and you can actually have some real time back and forth with us. Or you can hit the Q&A button, which will let us know that you have a written question that we'll read online and answer it that way. So if any of you guys have any questions, comments, so forth, let us know. Raise your hand, submit a question. And one just came through. So we have a question from Michelle, which I'll read and then let you guys respond to. Michelle says, I have a question about last week, if you have time. I started an education program a couple years ago where I was playing around with how to bring integral ideas into a classroom. I have no experience with education. The program was interesting yet awkward, and I felt in over my head most of the time. In spite of my overwhelming inexperience, I have somehow managed to attract attention from state DOE and 2 prestigious universities. One of the universities has developed a lovely K-12 program that has some solid integral components. If I had to say what I seem to bring to this group is some connective tissue, I see an opportunity that's getting missed and have ideas on how to connect it together with this program. This all feels beyond what I imagined would come from my little endeavor. So I'm finding myself swinging between self-doubt and wanting to hold space for the potential I believe these programs have. My question is around managing the space of the imaginal and the real. And how and then it kind of cuts off. So I think she had a second part of her question that sort of cut off. But it sounds like she is sort of oscillating between her, well, her strengths and her vulnerability in a certain kind of way. And I wonder if you guys have any advice for her.
I'll say very quickly and then listen to Gabe and Kim. The way I frame it, she's oscillating. Her oscillation is the process of evolution. She's oscillating between what she knows and what she doesn't yet know. And that the self-doubts are rising when she contemplates what she doesn't know. But that vision and then that being where I am and then that vision is actually how we evolve. So I think it's super. What do you guys think about her question? Oops, wrong.
Kim, do you want to say something?
No, you go ahead. I'm kind of looking forward to hearing what you have to say, given your background with education.
Yeah, just from an educator's point of view, the fact that 2 prestigious universities in the Department of Education is looking at you, I hear that you're insecure, and seems like life is giving you really positive feedback, you know, just in terms of the looks that you're getting. So that feels trustable to me. And in terms of, I don't know how young, you mentioned K-12, but in terms of the imaginal space and the real, oh golly.
And she did complete her sentence. If you want me to read the,
Did she?
Yeah. So let me.
Yeah.
My question is around the managing of the space of the imaginal and the real, and how it relates to believing you can do something while navigating the mature and immature sides of belief.
I would say something about that. Gabe, you want
Yeah,
to
go
first?
for it, Di.
Well, just that one little element of integral theory, and Corey can help us with this, is that we talk about not only the process of evolution, but how things come into form. Mm-hmm. And things come into form from the causal to the subtle to the gross. So you necessarily, the subtle realm is where our things start to become defined, our ideas start to get played out, we think about it, we imagine what could go wrong. We play with everything because there's no gravity. Form is really easy to change and shift up. And so imagination has everything to do with then what gets executed in the real. And so playing in relationship to the gross, subtle, causal is, again, this, what do we call it, Corey? When things come into form and go out of form?
Involution?
Involution. You know, so you're really literally participating with creativity and with evolution when you're doing that. So it isn't, in my mind, it's not a polarity. The imaginal and real is not a polarity. The real and the unreal is. But in this case, subtle and And, you know, and when we innovate, we create a software program, and then we get all the kinks out, and then we imagine the next iteration. We iterate in order to imagine the next evolutionary form. So becoming just really at home in both of those domains and making sure that you create a feedback loop between the two of them is what seems important to me.
That's beautiful.
As an educator, I'm not sure what you're doing, but in terms of the imagination, I'd go full hog. And if life is giving you really positive feedback in the form of the DOE and prestigious universities, like just trust it and like listen to the feedback. My sense is,
Do you guys think Gabe is biased towards prestigious universities?
I might
Gabe,
have
I went
been
to the
to
University
one.
of Utah.
I might have been to one. Prestigious, one-up university. But, you know, I think education is so structured around, it's a longer conversation, but I think it can be busted open in terms of what it means to be a human being. And so whatever imagination you can bring into that and however you can make that real, like by all means. Yeah.
And it kind of, when I was reading Michelle's question, it sort of reminded me of just my own sort of imposter syndrome. You know, like I'm showing up to do all these shows, I'm popping up on camera, and I'm perpetually afraid of being found out. I'm perpetually afraid of someone seeing me and knowing something about me and calling me out and feeling that embarrassment and that vulnerability and all that. And yet I keep getting these signs, you know, I'm sitting in the seat, I must be doing something right. People are watching these shows, I must be doing something right. That sort of keeps me aligned with my purpose. But it's not like those anxieties really go away, or even, you know, you can manage them better, but they don't really go away. And that's when I remind myself that like people like Neil Gaiman struggle with imposter syndrome. He's one of the most prolific writers out there. Neil Armstrong struggled with imposter syndrome. And yet there's something sort of at our core that feels a lot like purpose. I think that allows us to continue putting one step in front of the other and have the faith that there's going to be ground there beneath our feet. And it's difficult. It's a tough one. It's a tough one to navigate, at least in my experience. It's been a really difficult one to navigate, and it's sort of ongoing in a certain kind of way. And if anyone else,
is it different? Is it different? Would you say in Asia, Kim, or in the UK? I mean, does the pressure in America to be somebody play differently, do you think?
You mean just sort of in response to what Corey was saying about imposter syndrome and the sort of project itself?
Yeah, self-doubt.
Oh no, I'd say the Asians are really good at that. Really good at feeling the self-doubt and the sense of not enough-ness. You know, from young, that's part of some of the social conditioning, I would say. Very much some kind of drive happening where it's, I must be more than currently maybe what I am in this moment. And that enoughness, that insufficiency, certainly playing out in the psyche. To the UK, well, what's really great about the UK folks is that the sense of humor can be so self-deprecating. Like sometimes you can harness it in almost as a strength. So Corey just speaking in that moment, like showing that vulnerability, but it being like, oh, well, that's so wonderful as like part of your character, you know, the Brits have a nice way of weaving it and making light of the situation. And maybe because it rains so much, there's a slight pessimism about what any of this could be anyway. We'll just try and hold it together until tea time kind of thing. So, yeah.
That's great.
Michelle, I wish you really well with it. I'm curious to know how it pans out.
Yeah, Michelle, join us in a future episode and let us know. So it looks like Jocelyn has her hand raised. Jocelyn, I'm going to bring you over. And I'm going to unmute you.
Okay.
Hi, Jocelyn.
Hi. I'm so happy to catch this live again. I'm so excited because I can't be around Two Arrows Zen lately. So this is my way of getting my taste of it. So I wanted to ask a question because I have a social media platform with a significant amount of followers at this point, and I always go back and forth between my mind of, you know, the message of putting out there and how communicating and like using your chakra, like learning how to communicate, provides a lot of healing in, you know, from psychological development and communicating things that maybe you went through to develop a shadow and things of that nature. But going back to what Diane was saying about being an activist, and I'm trying to figure out a way to clearly communicate this, but I always worry about pushing my own agenda of being an activist, and that me accusing maybe higher ups in society is a part of my victim shadow. Do you know what I'm saying? Like going back and forth in my mind, still painting some type of a filter that there's like this control and power, but it's there. Do you guys know what I'm saying? Like the filter of how you see society and versus what's real versus what's not, like what you're painting. Does that make sense?
Does to me.
Yeah,
Does
totally.
it to you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I remember in one of the trainings Diane was giving recently, one of the participants shared this question of how much am I replicating, you know, in my actions, in my just, you know, the way in which I show up to the collective, how am I replicating actually some of those biases which might not be present, you know, had it not given that light touch from all the, you know, the ways in which we show up together. So I thought there was a sensitivity in her asking that, and I can certainly relate to what you're saying on a personal level. Actually, in just last night, noticing integral justice warrior and thinking about this notion of justice warrior, one thing that showed up for me was this distinction that I've always been curious about retributive justice and restorative justice, and how, you know, I think sometimes our language or our approaches can have this little watercolor glaze of a punitive approach of I have to punish the other. I need to, you know, in order to right this power differential, there needs to be some kind of, you know, a knocking off and a one down. So yeah, maybe I just share that, but to say that in the restorative, by comparison, has a more in like how can we find greater wholeness by integrating those different parts, even those ones that have caused harm. So that's something that I just offer in case it could be supportive to your contemplation as to how you experience maybe injustice in the world, but then how do you reach out and extend across those divides?
Yeah. Yeah, I love the way you worded that. That made complete sense.
I would just jump in really quick, and where I bump into it, Jocelyn, is whenever I take a stand, especially on behalf of a group that I identify with, I just notice being more aggressive towards the other, the one that doesn't hold my point of view, the other that's not part of the group that I'm speaking on behalf of. And so that's a natural kind of arising in me. And I hear you connecting it back to, at least what I'm intuiting is like there's like a personal side, your own psychological experience and our own traumas and triggers. And then there's also an us versus them dynamic. And so from that group point of view, the more identified any of us feel with a group, the incidence of like conflict and tension between other groups increases. And so I even notice that in myself. Whenever I take a stand for a group, I notice my own activation against the other, right? And I have to always kind of do that yoga of how can I use my anger, which is clarity, to make a point and invite them into a condition that would be good for both of us, versus just being aggressive and using anger to cut them and to hurt them and to what have you. It's a fine line. I don't have the answer to it, but that's my own yoga around it.
Okay.
That's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
And Jocelyn, I think maybe just a final thing to say, and this is really something that I learned from Trungpa Rinpoche many years ago, is that, you know, he said, be yourself, the world will give you feedback. So whether we choose to be healing in our communications, whether we choose to be really challenging, possibly aggressive, what comes back from that, you know, because the very same gesture in a different moment will have a different outcome. So sometimes, you know, you can be very penetrating and all it does is create more animosity. And other times it actually creates an opening and stillness. So the trick always is to stay deeply in relationship to what impact your gesture has so you can learn.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And especially the feedback, because I have been noticing, depending on certain days and how my moods are, that people will literally reflect back to me exactly what I put out there, which is so incredible to watch. Like one day I felt like a victim about my health breaking down, and that's part of the thing I get worked up about is food and things like that. And I had someone email me out of the blue, one of my clients, and that was for word saying my thoughts and accusing me. And I was like, wow, oh my gosh, I was blown away by that. So yeah, I love that you pointed that out. The feedback makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Great.
Right. Well, thank you for the question, Jocelyn.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And I hope you can join us for the next show next month. We've got another question, a written question from Marjorie. In regards to Diane's earlier reference to herself as a has-been, while that goes a long way to coming into community from a vulnerable, sort of self-deprecating manner, I was somewhat triggered by the way in which she seemed hesitant to own her own wise woman archetypal presence. In order for our young ones to know that it's okay for them to not have to take on full responsibility for the problems they inherited from us, we as elders are still here, willing and ready to step up and participate with them from the perspective of elder. Can you speak to this?
Yes, I would say you're absolutely right. And we talked about how whenever there's a polarity, like young and old, there's a tendency to value one more than the other, or to put one side up and the other side down. And in that moment, I put being older down. But you're absolutely right that, you know, we can provide leadership, perspective, we can share our experience, we can help boost young people up. There's all kinds of things we can do. And I think when you're talking maybe about just the complexity of the world and the pressures of the climate crisis and others, it is true that, you know, young people are inheriting that. And so it's absolutely imperative that we participate in that. And I was just facilitating a dialogue the other day between a group of young people and older people around their respective tensions on those issues, and young people feeling that things are urgent and they don't want to move at the pace older people want to move, and older people saying, we're totally willing to move with you. Sometimes what we notice is you say you want responsibility and then you don't really want to take it. So there was some interesting, very energizing back and forth. So I appreciate your comment, and yeah, I do have some things to offer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marjorie. All right, guys. I don't see, let me check right here. I don't see any other questions for right now. If someone else has another question, we've got another 10 minutes or so that we can field it.
Bring old Salzman in. Is he still on the call?
Yeah, Jeff is there, but he's being suspiciously quiet.
See if he shows up. If he shows up, we'll pull him in. Are you
should
multitasking, Jeff?
Oh, he's raising his hand.
His
All
hand
right.
just went up.
Great. Speaking of elders.
Hey, how are you?
Hey,
Good.
Jeff.
Yay. No,
Good.
I'm actually not multitasking. I am, well, unless you count eating this appalling sour green apple Tootsie Roll Pop, which I can't believe they make this. How is this allowed? Anyway, but other than that, no, I'm actually quite engaged in drinking it up. I feel like this is a real integral discussion, and I'm just, in a way, speechless. Even the questions and the questioners.
Yeah, they're good, aren't they?
Yeah.
Hey, Jeff, I did want to introduce you to Kim and Gabe because I don't know if you know them, and I want Kim and Gabe to know that when I came to work, if you will, from Integral Institute, it was Jeff who basically hired me and was my boss.
Yeah.
So it was up to him to keep me in line.
Oh, boy. Jeez, that was something. But yeah, hi, Gabe. You and I've met.
Yes, we've met a couple
I'm
times,
not
Jeff.
sure I've met you, but it's nice to meet you, and I appreciate your, transmission.
Really nice to meet you, Jeff. Heard your name spoken warmly many times.
Yay. Yeah.
And of course, Jeff is coming back to the Daily Evolver starting next Wednesday. And Jeff, you're going to be doing a Q&A format, yeah?
Yeah, I'm going to do, I'm thinking of it in terms of the Daily Evolver talk show. And, because what I do
Fun.
is basically, one of the topics, of course, is what you guys are talking about. And this ongoing evolution that is fueled by conflict and love and all of the mess of being human, but is in warp speed right now. And you guys, I really feel like, it's a relief from reading the mainstream media and listening to the mainstream media to hear what you're saying. And so I'm all on board with that. And then I talk politics and culture and whatever, and anybody who's listened to the Daily Evolver knows. And so, yeah, I'm going to be taking calls and seeing how that goes.
And you're starting up when again?
On Wednesday, so this coming Wednesday, which,
Great.
yeah.
Do you know what your subject matter will be Wednesday?
Well, not necessarily. I think I'll start by just reading some stuff out of the news that has caught my eye and maybe give a perspective or two on that, and then just see what comes up. And if people are interested in talking, that's great. If not, we'll close it up and I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. Because the truth is, feedback makes me nervous. And I don't really, and my listeners make me nervous. So
Me too, Jeff.
I'm not sure I even want to do it at all. I'm going to give it a try, okay?
The thing is that I always appreciate that. I mean, besides you're just one of the most gracious and kind of like genuinely hospitable, in
Amen.
terms of making those of us unfamiliar familiar and welcoming and inclusive, just people, just super person. But you're also such an elegant thinker. And I think the way that you think about contemporary events, I mean, I would always want to hear what other people have to say, but I always want to make sure you tell us what you're thinking also.
Yeah.
Because you remind me, that expression that evolution is beautiful, but it's not pretty. He's always reminding me that things are better than we tend to act like they are, which is kind of the fact that we need to be reminded, that I need to be reminded, is so insane. But that's really something that Jeff does really, really consistently, is just appreciate just how remarkable all of this is, that we're informed, that we're learning, we're growing, we're in this amazing conversation, we're doing it online, we're talking to people around the world, we have full bellies. I mean, it's astounding.
Yeah.
I appreciate that in you.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm a fairly hopeful and optimistic guy. And yet when I'm on the line with you, whenever you and I are talking, I always feel like just this lowly cynic because just the luminosity of your own optimism. And I know you don't frame it that way. I know you don't frame it as optimism, but to the rest of us, that's what it takes.
Yeah.
Right. And it's beautiful to see. And I'm just so excited that you are coming back for your weekly show.
Me too.
Well, I think it's good to point out the updraft of consciousness.
Yeah.
And that things look bad when compared to our fantasy of how they should look.
Right.
But if we look at the trends, and again, you just step back far enough and you see that we're living in an amazing geyser of updraft. And that is, somebody's got to point that out, because in a way, when we can become friendly to that or friendlier to that, then we can get into the fray in a way that's not condemning You know, we're not coming from a position of this shouldn't be happening. It's awful that it is. I can't stand it. Somebody needs to be condemned. I mean, I just can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you
Well,
do a great job of
thank you.
that.
You are a geyser of updraft, my friend.
Hey, man.
I like that. Well, Jeff,
you guys
thanks.
are doing great, and I really appreciate this. And I listened to every word of it.
That's
Thank you,
fantastic.
Jeff.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Jeff.
Thanks for coming on, Jeff.
You bet.
All right, and we do have one more question, guys, which is from Brooke McNamara. It's a very important question. Brooke wants to know, why are you all so awesome? So, can you answer that, please?
Because we're her Dharma sister and brother.
Yeah. Totally.
It's in the family of awesomeness.
Family of awesomeness.
Yeah, because you're pretty darn awesome too, Brooke.
Exactly.
Well, guys, this has been amazing. Kim and Gabriel, thank you so much, Gabe. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been just such a wonderful discussion. I hope you guys can join us again.
Yeah.
Certainly for book launch in May. But Diane, let's bring them back before then, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Love being with them.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to come on and speak with you.
Yeah, this has been wonderful, and I hope everyone can join us for episode 3 of Integral Justice Warrior. When are we doing that, Diane? We're doing that on October 26th, I believe.
October 26th. Okay, great.
26th. Yeah, so that'll be at 3 p.m. on Saturday. I hope everyone who's watching now can join us then. In the meantime, guys, thank you so much. The book is called Compassionate Conversations. We've got a link right underneath there, or at least we will when we publish this to the site. I hope everyone watching this pre-orders it. I'm sure you will. And just thank you. Thank you so much for your
Thanks, you
presence
guys.
and your
Bye,
grace and
everybody.
intelligence and all that.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Dad. Thank you,
Peace.
Kim. Bye, y'all.
Bye, everybody.